Here we go. Did everybody hear that? Okay, great. All right. Well, let's get started. We have heard from Jacob to begin with. But you sped through your presentation very, very quickly. So now we have time to engage further. Yeah, like we really wanted to focus on the lessons from the Act Now Coalition and how it was formed in the beginning. There's so much depth and breadth to what you're doing. But kind of how did it start and how did you bring folks together across the state for these projects in what are very rural communities that are kind of traditionally overlooked? So that's kind of one piece I think that we can start with, and maybe, you know, Tina as well, you can chime in with that. The second piece we wanted to look at here, and we have some time, is maybe some conflict resolution within that lens, and how we can address that and strengthen our collaborations within that. So we thought we'd just start with some more information from our speakers, and then maybe, you know, we can have a discussion. And then again, Tina, actually, if you want to join in after Jacob, that would be great.
Right. Cool. That sounds awesome. So for context, you know, we're not trying to coordinate our efforts to bring in some, you know, hopeful large scale employer to a community and just sort of wait and pray and bank on that. We're really trying to put the power into the community's hands to pull down the funding to then be the actuators of the opportunities. So it's kind of a different perspective there a little bit in terms of like a traditional CBA. And so with that lens, we felt it was really important to really identify, you know, who are the people representing the communities, who are the people representing the sectors and the regions that this work is happening in right now, and how can we connect with them in a way that is holistic and also holds us accountable to each other. And so, you know, it starts with sort of just traditional collaboration that we have with, you know, as a community-based nonprofit, we work a lot with communities, obviously with cities, with employers, and with unions. We're unionized carpentry union and electrical workers union. And so looking at that stakeholder analysis, as I mentioned before, we like tools. And so stakeholder analysis was another form of that, of, you know, sort of who's in the region that can work together to help pull down this crazy amount of funding that's sort of once in a generation available. And so it started with just those conversations, and then those conversations turned into convenings. How can we all sort of meet together? And it was really tough at first. And sort of gets to your conflict resolution question. You know, when you do have so many stakeholders and so many communities, we have two large universities, Marshall University and West Virginia University, and they are bitter rivals, but they're also two largest players in the state in terms of educational institutions and bastions of education, economic diversification, research. So it's obvious that they're the players that we should address, but they never work together with each other. And so as a nonprofit organization, we were really keenly positioned to be, and again, like I'm sort of, we walked ourselves into sort of a CBA structure, not really realizing that this is a CBA structure. Like we were sort of the mediator and the moderator. Didn't have to get to arbitration really at all. We weren't an arbitrator, but sort of the person who was able to convene these conversations together and outline, you know, I know you want 10 out of 10 of your requests and you want 10 out of 10 of your requests. Where can we meet to where, you know, where would you be happy at if it was 8 out of 10, and we can agree together that these are the 8 out of 10 that we agree on, and then keep the 2 out of the 10 of the other whole picture as sort of long-term vision goals that we can all work together on. So, you know, with over 50 different organizations, we were going to have 50 different opinions. And so how can we all sort of same page and identify what are the core agreements that we have? We know workforce is one of them. We know economic diversification is another, and we know grounding all that in communities and grounding that in our partners are the 3 tenets that we can all agree upon. And so it was important to make sure that those partners had the capacity and capability to engage and be a part of that conversation. Again, we don't just want to pursue the big partners like Marshall and West Virginia University. That makes sense. That's important. And also we want to ground ourselves with the smaller scale, smaller communities, smaller based organizations and citizens of those communities as well. And so we had to sort of backfill some capacity building for some of those other partners so they could be able to have the bandwidth, the time, the capability, the tools to then engage in those conversations and not feel like it's a daunting task to talk about $100 million grant, because the largest grant some of these organizations have pulled down is maybe 25,000. So when you're talking about 100 million, that's like, oh my God, that's going to come with an audit. That's going to come with all these reporting complications. It's going to be tough. I'd rather someone else do it. But if someone else does it, we know it's going to end up in an extractive way that doesn't benefit us at all. So we had to do just a lot of capacity building internally as well. And so I think that helped to neutralize a lot of the conflict, because we knew we were here to help each other out a lot, and we knew we had to be the patchwork built to make it happen. But you're never going to get around the politics. You're never going to get around the differences of opinions. You just have to sort of acknowledge it outright and identify the things you agree on and try and make them simple. Tina, I'd love to hear more about your experience with that as well.
Right, absolutely. And we're at the very beginning of this process with the company we're working with. And it is just the opposite of what you had described, because it is a large company. And already, I mean, there's some hope on our part, because when you go into their plant looks like the community. And that's a surprise. Quite often that does not happen. And the difference also is that many of these jobs can be had with a high school education. They have that is a big deal for our region, for our area. They're starting out right now. We have a special pilot we're doing with them to hire seniors and hopefully make this a career opportunity for some of them. But they'll bring on graduating seniors and pay them right around $19 an hour to work at the plant and to learn what's going on and how to function in that industry. So, and the whole idea around this DOE grant that they're going after is, the equity part is just 20% of the overall grant. That's the focus, but the other picture is they're looking at shifting and moving and having their supply chain in our region, in our area. That's a big deal. Right now, it would, I don't know how many hundreds of jobs for just EOS, for just that company, but for the supply chain, pieces of the supply chain to move into the Mon Valley, that's literally hundreds, thousands more jobs. That's a real, I would say that's a real catalyst to long-term change, to systemic change.
That's great. And I do want to get in discussion, but I just have a quick question, because I'm actually personally dying to know. This could either go for both of you, but and by the way, I hope you all attend Thursday, day 2, because the breakouts and the panels are also amazing. On day 2, we're going to dig into some more practical skills in terms of actual methods of conflict resolutions or negotiating hard agreements. So really hope to see you all on day 2. My question is, how has your work, have you either collaborated or collided with existing political structures, and have you been accepted or turned away? And how do you deal with that?
Yes. So I guess a good way to frame sort of our work is that we have a CBA with the federal government. So we're trying to convince them that communities know best how to spend these dollars, and actually the structure that you have to disperse this funding does not reflect communities' capabilities, desires, what they're asking for. And so oftentimes it's us having to negotiate with these archaic structures that are, maybe made sense in the 60s when they, started these departments, but does not reflect the sort of post mono economy of the coal region that we're in now, that needs to evolve, needs to adapt. When we applied for this funding through our Act Now Coalition to EDA, they said, we don't want to pay for trainees' wages. We don't want to pay for that. Like, that should be something that you all figure out how to fundraise for. That's something that we don't see as relevant to our work. And like, how can that not be relevant? That's literally the crux of the lifeblood of the community is investing in the workforce, giving them a living wage to learn the trades. And so it's a slog, because you're trying to change decades, if not centuries old system, and convince them that you, the organization on the ground level, with a coalition of other organizations on the ground level, know best the needs of the community, and are trying to negotiate back and forth on, okay, can you meet us here? Well, can you meet us here? And exchange back and forth. Sometimes it's a quick change. We've seen quick changes before. We've changed entire legislations and policies in our state, but for the federal level, it's much slower. It takes a lot longer, but we have seen change there as well.
That's really insightful. Thank you. And Tina, I'm dying to know, as your neighbor out here.
Yeah, so let me say this. So when I say we're at the beginning, not even at the beginning yet. So that they're applying for this grant. So the hope is that they'll be successful, so that all of the communities that I mentioned will reap some of those benefits. So we're at the beginning of the process, and laying down the foundation, putting things together so that there can be a positive outcome. It would, of course, it would mean so much to our communities to see this come into fruition. But right now, the grant is not had. So that is, we want to be in a position like Jacob, where there's dollars flowing, and we already have a plan in place. But we're not waiting. We're not going to wait. And this is the great thing, that I'm pleased with EOS, to say, you know what, the planning begins right now. Because once that announcement happens, and we notice from the first round of funding, they already had those things. The companies that were successful, they had begun the planning process well in advance, and they were prepared. And so we're doing just that. We're not waiting to find out what their needs are, and meeting with them. We're already planning and putting together those forums to make that happen, so that we have, we can kind of hit the ground running as soon as that release happens, which we anticipate. We're ready. We're prepared. Those conversations have ensued. We've talked about these things, and we know what some of the challenges are, as well as the desires in the respective communities. I think since there are a lot of small municipalities and boroughs, we're welcomed right now. They look at this. I mean, I hate to say it, hey, we're going to, this is the best thing since sliced bread. We're going to get some things that we really need. And I can envision, like, if you ride up and down, and you probably have, Natalia, right up and down Braddock Avenue or Rankin Boulevard, the first thing you see is the crumbling roads, and the potholes that are gigantic. So I can see those communities saying, we want a street that's repaved, that we don't have these problems, that it aesthetically looks pleasing. So I'm excited about that, and I think the community is behind. So far, all 5 of them, they're getting behind this, to say, we want this. If we're able, just imagine, every time it rains or we have a storm, our our power goes out in many of our communities. So
Wow.
it's terrible. So
Mm.
if we are able to change that, if we are able to create maybe this microgrid, this community, so we have a backup. Maybe we can use, even have EOS batteries to back us up. So, when the power goes out, lo and behold, our lights no longer go off. We still have, so that is what we're facing. When I say an aging uh, grid and an aging housing stock, it's just so everyday life. It has impacts on your bills, on whether or not the lights go out. Oh, it's going to storm. Really? Let me prepare in a new way. So this is these communities see this as an opportunity.
Wonderful. That's fantastic. By the way, I'm reading Out of This Furnace for the first time.
Oh,
Uh,
Tony Rudiak.
yeah, so fascinating. I'm in the middle right now. It's for people that don't know, it's a book about some of the history about Rudiak and the steel mill era in the early 1900s. It's kind of iconic in Pittsburgh, but reading it for the first time. All right, let's open it up. We can just speak up. I don't think we need to be super formal here. So if anybody has any questions, please feel free to. Because I could always ask more. Or if any of our guests want to mention something, you're more than welcome to.
I've got a question, Natalia.
Yeah.
Jenny. Hi, I'm in West Virginia, but my situation is very similar to what you just described about running from the weather and, prepping for the next big weather disaster to hit. We've been recovering from internet outages for about the last 3 weeks after the windstorm blew through the Midwest a few weeks ago. But at any rate, I'm curious about doing a community assessment and what kind of resources are you tapping into to do that assessment? Who are you using to do it? Are they professionals? And what's included in that assessment? And maybe that's for Will. I think Will was the one who
Or
mentioned that.
maybe Jacob, maybe?
Or, I'm sorry, was it Jacob?
I look like a Will. I'll take it.
You
Okay,
had
well,
like a Will, actually.
So for the more market-facing initiatives that we have, we use a stakeholder analysis, and we do that through sometimes we do that through third-party contractors that have a background in market analysis, stakeholder mapping, and so that really helps us to identify supply chains, demand sectors, supply sectors, sort of market gaps and market opportunities. That really helps to lay out an economic map of the region that we're looking to focus in. But for something more holistic, like what you're describing, and I like the term you used, you said like it was like stakeholder assessments, not like an analysis, but an assessment. Maybe that's what you said. But
it was community assessment.
Community, thank you. Community assessment, yeah. So that is much more patient and ground-based. And so that is very much so trust and relationship. It moves at the speed of trust is what we say. And so really working with, we're in, I'm not giving you the finger. This is the state of West Virginia. So, we're like right here. And there's a project down here that we want to work in. That's pretty far for us to commute normally. But we know some partners down here that are local nonprofits that are sort of redevelopment agencies. There's a women's club. There's a United Mine Workers Association for retired miners who are fighting for Black lung benefits. So we know that there is an ecosystem of movers and shakers and leaders and change agents there, that then we reach out to them and ask them, who do you think should be involved? Who do you think we should reach out to? Who do you think we should engage? And then that starts a broader conversation, and then they reach out to their network. And then by then we sort of drafted this list of potential participants and stakeholders that then we should reach out to. And that starts what we call the charrette, which is a French word, meaning just sort of you pull up this. That's what these posters are behind me. They're pictures and posters and blueprints of the buildings and sites and projects in these communities that we all take Sharpies and just draw on and say, like, what do you want to see here? What do you want to see here? You want to see this over there? Okay. What's over here that you want to see brought over here? What's not here? What didn't work? What should we be aware of? And so it's a lengthy process as compared to a market analysis, but it is very qualitative, and it helps greatly for the longevity of our projects. So I hope that answered your question.
Yeah, another one that it stimulated though is what is the sort of the trust quotient that you need to have in order to conduct that kind of an analysis, and does it build trust?
Yes and yes. So we're local. It helps that we're local. We're a West Virginia-based nonprofit organization based in the coalfields of West Virginia. I have 3 generations of coal mining in my family, and so it is that already opens up a lot of doors where there wouldn't be doors opened otherwise if you were, a consultant from Washington, D.C., or, a developer from New York. There's just so many cultural barriers there that our region has had such a history of extraction of people coming from the outside, taking things and promising things that never happen, that, we're able to, that trust isn't having to be renewed each time, that it builds upon itself with each project, because these communities talk to each other, they see each other, they know that we have a reputation to uphold and a responsibility to these communities. And so that trust process starts with those conversations, that outreach, but it's also gets a huge shot in the arm and a huge jumpstart because we hire local, we hire people who are in those communities, and we train those people to then be the change agents and leaders to start these projects. So it helps a lot that it's local people doing the work.
Thank you. That sounds like my backyard.
Happy to connect with you too. I saw you sent me your email, and we can continue the conversation later.
I'll wait to hear from you. Thanks.
I do also want to mention at 2:30, we're going to have a few organizations, including the Just Transition Fund, RMI, National Wildlife Federation, sharing some resources about capacity building and what kind of funding and programming there may be available for capacity building. So we're having this discussion, but we want to make sure that you're armed with some of that practical information as well. All right, any further questions, any further discussion? Opening the floor here. I'll ask a question. So Jacob, you mentioned like third-party contractors and things like that, like for folks in the room, like where do you find, and Tina as well, right? Like, or anybody who's undertaken this process, like where do you find a third-party community development contractor? How does that work?
Oftentimes they can be a third-party contractor, but they're not community oriented. Mm-hmm. And so that's where we come in to sort of bake in some of that, and we put in our request for proposals for these third-party contractors that this is the work you're going to be doing. Here's how we're requiring you do it. And we require you to do it in a way that is community focused, community oriented, host X amount of town halls and charrette workshops, engage a threshold of community members in a ratio proportionate to the population. And so we outline a starter kit for how to be community engaged. And so there are third-party practitioners that are good at the work and not used to the community side, that this helps them provide a roadmap on how to do good community-based work.
Oh. Anybody else? I will say that for folks that may not know, I am also a former elected official. I'm a former city council person from the city of Pittsburgh. And so I represented a really weird district. Some of it was the most conservative district in the city of Pittsburgh. and parts of it were some of the most marginalized and overlooked in the city of Pittsburgh. And so, you know, one of the struggles that I faced was, well, it's keeping that visioning going when a lot of the hope has been lost. And that's actually something we're going to talk about on Thursday, how we use this process for healing, how we use that process for looking forward, while acknowledging some of the grief from our past, because that is very, very real. You know, and I want to acknowledge that like funding is a really big deal, right? Like we have to keep some of this funding to keep going, which is why I think some of the resources at 230 are going to be really, really helpful. Yeah, just want to, I've had my share of charrettes and sticky notes, and I'm in the city, right? So had the bike lane arguments, which, you know, I don't know, Tina, if you deal with that as well. No, thank goodness. Yeah, it can be a hot topic in a city where people love their cars, and bike lanes can take up some precious road space. Yeah, look, I mean, as a former local elected official, local elected officials are really an integral part of this process. And have you dealt with any sticks in the mud? Some local elected officials that are like, what are y'all doing? Why are you here? What is this about? Maybe y'all can talk a little bit about that.
I see Tina nodding. I want to hear her response.
Yeah, I was trying to unmute myself. Well, there's some apathy and, you know, that just, I guess I look at it as kind of par for the course. This is going to be a myriad of folks that are at different levels when it comes to um, whether or not they want to see change, and things, you know, move forward. I will say this, just of recent, and this was on my bucket list. So Braddock was one of those municipalities that for 30 some years, we were in Act 47. And if I'm speaking a language you're not familiar with, let me know. And when I came on council, it was looked at, and I like to use that. I have to use an analogy. It was looked at as the best thing since sliced bread, and I couldn't understand why. I mean, to have a declaration as a financially distressed community, I don't want to be distressed in any way. So to have that as a declaration, you know, on your community, you're thinking, why is this so great? Why do you hold on to this? Why aren't you putting in place measures to move away from that? So, you know, there's often there's going to be a, you know, stick in the mud folks that see things and believe in things that just make absolutely no sense. Well, it had to do with the fact that, okay, if you're financially distressed, you can get a tax, a non-residence tax that amounts to probably 2 meals, all of $80,000. I mean, annually into a poor community, that could be important. But my ideology or philosophy was, okay, well, you find another way to garner that. You find do development. That's some of the things we do. So I started working with developers, building housing, getting things done. That brought property back on the tax rolls. It wasn't. So you have to find ways around that. But there will always be people that you know, and other, you know, electeds, why are you doing this? We don't need this, and kind of being able to push back and say why we do need it, why this is very important, is crucial. One of the things that along Braddock Avenue are what used to be, I mean, many moons ago, a bustling business district, is just, you know, in many respects an eyesore. And when you look at some of those businesses that are there, and you say, well, why doesn't someone buy this and open up a shop and do that? Well, there's encumbrances. For them to purchase that building, there's back taxes, there's water and sewage, as you know, are lienable items, all these things. So I created a program, BBCI, went to the county and said, listen, we don't have the capacity or wherewithal to do this, but you do, can clear off the encumbrances through your vacant property program, can help us to move these properties forward and get them back on the tax roll. And they and just the detail, the way we structured that program, they're like, wow. So we're in the midst of that right now. A request for a development proposal went out, and with the help of the county, and to their surprise, I mean, there were so many folks interested, but we created BBCI to make sure that it wasn't just speculators coming to buy up the property and sit on it until something great happened. But it was crafted in a way that local folks would have an opportunity. Folks even that look like me would have an opportunity to purchase those properties, start their new businesses. And that was just, just a great opportunity. So I think once folks see you do things that are, outside of the box and new and different, and you kind of prove, hey, this can be done. So right now we have some transformational businesses that and folks don't know yet all the businesses that are coming in, but we interviewed these companies, we met with them, we got a chance to look at the proposals and say, wow, these are great. And they're going to be opening up shop right along Braddock Avenue and transforming those spaces. But it takes partnership, and it takes linking with we had to link with the county economic development there, because if the borough doesn't have the wherewithal to even mothball those buildings, you're going to be in trouble. The roofs are falling in. Some of them we had to use drones to go in and do the assessment, but we hired the architectural firm to look at all those properties and assess where they were, and structurally and what have you. So this is great. And I just decided, and the way BBCI was structured, I knew I wasn't going to run after 16 years on council. I wanted to make sure that folks like me, everyday community residents, could have a part and be on that BBCI committee to shape things going forward. And that's the way it is. It's not all just elected official driven, but it is shaped by a number of different entities. And that's what I mean by partnerships and bridge building. It takes all of that to change a community.
That's amazing. It sounds like those 16 years in that program, working behind the scenes, that's a trust, right? That's the currency. I always say trust is like political currency, and you gotta build it up. And so now you have a lot of trust to work with and results to work with. So that's awesome to hear. I was speaking to the deputy director of the West Virginia Municipal League, and downtown revitalization isn't necessarily something that ReImagine Appalachia works on, but clearly it's a priority. And what's scary is that give it 10 years and some of our downtown buildings may not be able to be resuscitatable. Is that a word? And so certainly this goes hand in hand. We got to do the big manufacturing projects, but also potentially maybe even bundle some of these downtown revitalization projects as well as that could be a regional visioning process in and of itself. There's a story, and I'm not going to tell it correctly, about a community development executive director who'd come into a community and tried to do a needs assessment of what the community needs. And though all the indicators for public health and quality of life were low quantitatively, what the community wanted was a sports field. And the idea is, well, why would the community want a sports field when there's so many other problems? And no matter what, the sports field was built. And then from there, the community was able to trust the process and move on to bigger and bigger things. And so I think, the regional visioning can start from the hyper local issues, but then move forward as a group, I think. All right, any other comments, thoughts, questions? Something burning on your mind about regional visioning and everything we're talking about here? We have great experts in the room. Yeah. And I had a Dollar General move to my district. This was right after I got into office, and I flipped my lid because the zoning board, who does not care about my area of the city at all, approved a giant parking lot right on Main Street, right in front of the Dollar General, where that would never be accepted in other parts of the city, just to have a parking lot right in front. And I did leave office at that point, but I was upset to not have that not have that power.
They're
One,
all, go ahead. Jake.
go ahead, Jenny.
I was gonna say, in my area, they're almost like mile markers, like, oh, mile marker, the Dollar General, mile marker 8 is the
Family Dollar.
sheets. Yeah, right. Go ahead.
Love that visual. I put in the chat too, you know, if you're interested in sort of large scale initiatives, large scale funding, and you don't have a coalition or a network currently to help rally around to pull that down, a great resource to plug into that's a pre-existing network in perpetuity is if you're in Central Appalachia, which is sort of Ohio, Kentucky, West Virginia, parts of Virginia, sort of parts of Pennsylvania. Check out the Central Appalachian Network that I put in the chat here. They have groups of working groups that focus on downtown revitalization, agriculture, healthy food systems, upcycling, renewable energy, etc. And then within those groups are networks of other partners in Central Appalachia, and they work together to pull down big grants to then disperse to those partners. So it's a cool Kickstarter or like starter kit for networks and collaboration.
Wow, thank you. That's what we need.
I will also mention, and this is going to sound really kind of vague right now, but trust the process. There are probably about 8 federal funding trackers that I have come across. So what I mean is, like, oh, I'm gonna find them and put a bunch of links in the chat. We're gonna write a blog post about this within the next couple weeks. I've been tracking the trackers because every single time I get a new email about a new tracker, like, my head explodes, and I just want to know, like, what makes this one unique than the other one, and what, you know. So I'll put them in the chat and you'll see what I mean. But you know, when we talk about funding,
Oh, her head exploded.
sorry, what?
If you can hear us, you're frozen. You're unfrozen.
There we go.
Oh, I'm frozen.
You said if I see another tracker, my head will explode, and then you froze. So we assumed that it actually happened. So.
I actually saw another one. I just can't take it anymore. So I'm like, you'll see what I mean. All of these links track different types of funding from the federal government, and they're all a little bit different. So we're going to come up with a blog post kind of summarizing each of them, what makes them unique, why it might be helpful for you. But again, as we try to look at ways to build capacity and see what types of grants may align with the type of visioning that you're doing. And maybe some of these things you can use as carrots, right? Like, if some people don't want to come to the table, you know, you really need to dangle these carrots and say, look, you know, this is what we may be missing if we don't get our 5 municipalities together, if we don't get our community groups together, or public utilities, or whoever needs to be at the table. I mean, just like, all these links that I put in the chat did not exist a year ago, simply because there just wasn't the federal opportunities now. So it's pretty amazing what's on the table and what we need to draw down. Because we are competing against, I mean, I hate to say it, you know, but we're competing against New Mexico and Colorado and Wyoming and other coal communities for this type of funding. And so we really need to be well positioned and negotiate for community benefit agreements in our communities.
I have another question, Natalia.
Please.
Yeah, I wanted to check with actually both of the groups that are sharing their successes as to how to handle, especially in Appalachia, how to handle community conflicts. What are some sort of I don't know, special advice or nuggets of wisdom?
Jenny, can you give a specific example of sort of conflicts that you see in communities?
Yeah. One of them is sort of the power brokers, and they're sort of old, hardline family power brokers that have been in the community for hundreds and hundreds of years, I guess. And I am newer to that community than 100 years, but I mean, you've got 3 generations of coal miners. I don't have that. I have ancestors. I am a state granddaughter of, people back in the 1800s, but they left and then I came back. So I don't have I don't have those roots. And many people that are trying to move forward in the community don't have those roots either. They're newer to the community than somebody like you. So I hear about, I'm aware of the trust issue, and that is one way to assuage the conflict. But sometimes this gets ugly. You know how Appalachians are. I mean, yeah. A good old redneck brawl sometimes.
Yeah, I totally resonate with what you're describing. In the moment I introduce myself to someone, they ask me, well, what's your last name? Because that tells them more about who my family is and who I am holistically than just sort of who I'm presenting myself as to them. So not surprisingly, but in Appalachia, sort of your legacy carries a lot of weight, or the lack of makes for judgment. And so even one county over, I'm working one county over from where we're at right now, and it's almost like starting from scratch in some ways. Like statewide, I have some reputation, but county by county, it's very different. And so the best thing that we found, I'll give you an example. I'm working on a large scale solar installation on top of a former strip mine, and it's right next to a school. And I wanted to talk with the professor of the school because I knew that he's a leader, and we want to get involved with having trainings at the school and incorporate the students. And so I asked to meet with him one day, and he says, and just to let you know, I don't believe in solar. I don't believe in what you're doing. And I think coal is infinite and we're always going to have coal. And but I'm open to hear what you say, and I want to just sort of chat with you. And so it was like, wow, okay, out of the gate here, this person does not believe in what I'm doing, and I either have the choice to sort of see that as like, okay, like you're a lost cause, let's pivot to someone who does believe in it, or let's see where this conversation goes. And 45 minutes later, he and I are talking about how actually renewable energy is the electrical birthright of Appalachians to continue to produce electricity. And it's actually, just another tool in the toolbox of energy for us in Appalachia, and that it doesn't have to be mutually exclusive. Not every solar panel installed is a coal miner job loss. It's actually a safety net to catch the coal miners who are being laid off from the coal mines that are shutting down due to market factors. And so it was just a great educational opportunity to where, now he who could have been the loudest, squeakiest wheel is now my sort of local engagement there for folks who I know would have been very prickly and very defensive against something like this. And people are always going to go to the thing of, well, why are you investing money in renewable energy? What we need is X. What we need is Y. And they're very valid reasons that what they say that they need X or Y. But it doesn't have to be mutually exclusive. That's what we always put it down to. Like, just because we have a pot of money right now for solar doesn't mean we're never going to get a pot of money to improve the roads. Doesn't mean we're never going to get a pot of money to revitalize downtown. They're not mutually exclusive. There's just, right now is the season for this one. The government's telling us this pot of money is ready. If we don't pull it down, it's going to go away, and we'll miss this opportunity. And so really having those patient conversations. It's tough, it's sticky, but having those local champions, those local partners to help diffuse that, and who already have that trust with the community is super helpful, especially when you don't have that reputation in the community in the first place. They do. They know people who know people who know people, and they're the people who people trust.
Thank you.
Thanks.
That was
Yeah.
awesome.
Yeah, I wanted to say, I guess just along a different vein, quite often it's been in our communities, it's been council or the presidents of council that have wielded all the power and made the decisions. And the fact that, as I said, I was on council for 16 years and president of council for 7 of those years. I really wanted to hear the voice of the people. Not everyone feels like that, though. And one of the things I will say about the community benefit process and the whole agreement, quite often, that agreement, especially when it comes from a company, is not signed off, by council. It is the coalition or whoever that leadership that is built around that. So the opportunity to shift that power structure and to make sure that it's more spread out amongst the group of leaders and not just one sole person and that is quite often difficult for those people in power. I mean, I felt it a little bit, going to the council meetings and saying, hey, well, the mere fact that I'm structuring things to take the forum, you've been invited, but you're invited to a much larger group where the voices of all will matter. I mean, that is kind of eye-opening, like, whoa, council won't get the final say where these dollars are going to go and what they're going to do. No, you won't. It's going to be, the whole group. There's input from residents, from stakeholders, business owners, and I think that in and of itself shifts things, and it shifts things in a good way that many voices are heard, and there's some transparency that may not have previously existed. We're just we're just counsel, because they're not going into executive session on us. Where we're going to discuss things in an open forum. And Laura, I guess you have your lab, so you have some knowledge around this. Yeah, so I think that the process, just the way it's laid out, kind of takes and shifts that barrier.
Love it. Yep, that script. Heck yeah. All right, we have a few minutes left before we get pulled back. And again, I hope y'all stay for the final 30 minutes, because we'll be showcasing some resources from some national and regional groups that could be really, really helpful for grant writing and technical assistance and things like that. But I will say, even as a council, as a former council person, it's like, yeah, you gotta relinquish some of that power and give it back. But I also see, as a progressive elected official who represented kind of a more conservative community, what I loved about flipping that script is well, this is what the people want. I'm just representing the people. So that's always a fantastic feeling to come in the room with people behind you, an army of people behind you, and an army of people at public speaking as well. Use those 3 minutes wisely. At least we had 3 minutes for public speaking. I know some of the smaller boroughs do not have time limits on public speaking, and I don't know how y'all do it. Right. Any final thoughts for discussion? Well, this has been really fantastic. Thank you all for sharing your knowledge. I don't know, if you're all open for it, maybe you can put your contact information in the chat. I
I also want to hear Laura. She came off mute a couple
Oh,
times.
I
know
saw
she's got
you. I
something to
didn't
say.
see you. Sorry.
I only just wanted to say thank you so much for this. Just really appreciative of all the sharing of the information. I will add a brief side story of my elected officialhood. I'm in year 8 and I just resigned because I was gonna finish. I decided I just really couldn't finish my term. I fought a lot of battles. I had a lot of conflict in my service. I appreciate all the learning from those of you that have much more experience in conflict resolution than me. That wasn't my area of expertise. But I fought for a lot of things, and I gained some ground. But the politics just got so ugly, I just had to leave. But I said, to the interested reporters after so many battles, why now? The truth of the matter was I felt like I could be more useful in a non-elected official position, but I didn't really even know what that meant, but it was clear to me, that particular thing. And I think this opportunity came in a time that was really helpful for me personally. And so I appreciate hearing all these voices personally. So thank you so much for all the work.
Thank you. Well, I'm not an elected official anymore either. So there you go. I get it. Sometimes you reach the upper echelon of what you can push for. You got to push from the outside.
I just wanted to say, Laura, there's life after after council. And I mean, and one of the things I think I mentioned, EOS reaching out to me. So trying to identify what I wanted to do, they asked, can you do help us with this and do community consulting for us? So, I mean, that's a big deal. And having all those years of experience, knowing who to reach and, just who the players are. So it has proved valuable, and you can take that knowledge and even in crafting some things for the community. You're right, it got toxic, and so to shift from that, it's almost like you can breathe again, and you did service but yeah, change is good.
Thank you.
Toxic is a good word. That's close to the bone. Yeah.
Oh, wait, let's not end on that note. Let's end on hope and hope and change, right? We heard that from somewhere before. Let's get some of that energy. Let's get some of that 2008 energy back.
That Obama energy. It was that hope and
Obama
change.
energy. Yeah, this is great. Thank you all again, and thank you, Emily, for taking notes. Really appreciate everybody coming together to pull this summit together. It's been a quite a process. Since about February we've been working on this, but we wouldn't be able to do it all without your participation. And we had about